They laughed when I walked into that boardroom. My own family, sitting around the mahogany table like they owned the world, looking at me like I was nothing more than a bad joke. My brother Marcus smirked. My sister Jessica rolled her eyes. And my father, well, my father just shook his head in disappointment. But by the end of that day, everything changed when my private jet landed right outside their window. If you've ever felt underestimated by the people closest to you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because this story might just change how you see your own potential. Picture this. You walk into a room full of people who are supposed to love and support you, but instead, they treat you like you're invisible. That's exactly what happened to me on a cold Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. The Johnson family meeting was supposed to discuss our late grandmother's business legacy, but it quickly turned into a roast session about my unrealistic dreams and childish fantasies. Every word they spoke felt like a dagger, each laugh echoing in my mind like thunder. You know that feeling when your own blood makes you question everything about yourself? I remember standing there in my old blazer, the one I'd worn to every job interview for the past 2 years. Marcus, always the golden boy, was wearing his expensive designer suit, fresh from his Wall Street success. Jessica had just gotten promoted to senior partner at her law firm, and there she was, looking at me like I was the family embarrassment. My father, the man who built this empire from scratch, couldn't even make eye contact with me. The tension in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But here's the thing about moments like these. They either break you, or they become the fuel that drives you to prove everyone wrong. As I stood there feeling smaller than an ant, something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in determination. I realized that their laughter wasn't about me failing. It was about their fear of me succeeding. They were comfortable with me being the underdog because it made them feel better about their own insecurities. That's when I knew I had to make a choice: stay small or fight back. What they didn't know was that while they were busy judging my appearance and mocking my dreams, I had already planted seeds that would grow into something they never saw coming. The business proposal I'd been working on for months, the connections I'd been building, the sleepless nights I'd spent perfecting my craft, none of that mattered to them in that moment. But little did they know, those seeds were about to bloom in ways that would leave them speechless. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. My name is Alexandra Johnson. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to proving that sometimes the biggest underdog becomes the most unexpected champion. You see, success isn't just about money or status. It's about that moment when you realize you don't need anyone's permission to become who you're meant to be. For years, I let other people's opinions define my worth, but that day in the boardroom changed everything. I'm sharing this story because maybe, just maybe, you're sitting in your own version of that room right now, feeling like you don't belong. Growing up in a family of high achievers isn't always the blessing people think it is, especially as a woman trying to carve her own path. When your brother graduated valedictorian from Harvard Business School and your sister passed the bar exam on her first try, being the creative one feels more like a curse. I chose a different path. Entrepreneurship, technology, innovation, things my family couldn't understand because they couldn't measure them with traditional metrics. Every family dinner became a subtle interrogation about when I was going to get serious about my life and find a real job like a normal woman should. The worst part wasn't their criticism. It was how I started believing them. There were nights I'd lie awake wondering if they were right, if I was just chasing impossible dreams while everyone else was building real careers. Self-doubt is like a poison that spreads slowly through your mind until you start seeing yourself through other people's eyes. I began questioning every decision, every risk I took, every opportunity I pursued. The voice in my head wasn't my own anymore. It was theirs, constantly reminding me that I wasn't good enough, that I should settle down and be practical. But here's what I learned about being underestimated as a woman in business. It's actually a superpower in disguise. When people don't expect much from you, they don't watch you as closely. They don't see the hours you put in, the sacrifices you make, or the progress you're building brick by brick. While Marcus was busy networking at country clubs and Jessica was climbing the corporate ladder, I was in my apartment at 3 a.m., coding, creating, and building something that would eventually change everything. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right. That family meeting wasn't just about discussing Grandma's legacy. It was about determining who deserved to carry it forward. They saw me as the weak link, the dreamer who would squander whatever inheritance came my way. What they didn't realize is that I had already started building my own legacy, and it had nothing to do with what they thought I deserved. The real story was just beginning, and the plot twist that was coming would shake them to their core. Let me paint you a picture of the Johnson family dynamics, because understanding where I came from will help you see why their reaction hit so deep. My father, Robert Johnson, built a real estate empire from nothing, started with one small apartment building in the 1980s and turned it into a multi-million-dollar portfolio. He's the kind of man who measures success in square footage and profit margins, where everything has to make sense on a spreadsheet. My mother passed away when I was 15, and after that, Dad threw himself even deeper into work, expecting all of us kids to follow his traditional business model. In his mind, there were only two acceptable career paths: law or finance, period. Marcus, my older brother, was always the golden child who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. Harvard MBA, six-figure salary by 25, married to a senator's daughter named Victoria, who came from old money. He had this way of making every conversation feel like a business negotiation, always talking about market trends and investment opportunities like he was some kind of oracle. Marcus never missed a chance to remind me that playing around with computers wasn't a real career for a grown woman. His success made him arrogant, and frankly, it made him forget where we all came from. Then there's Jessica, my younger sister, who became a corporate lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions. She's brilliant, I'll give her that. Photographic memory, never lost a case, partnership track at one of the city's most prestigious firms. But Jessica had this cold, calculated way of looking at everything, including family relationships. She saw my entrepreneurial dreams as high-risk, low-probability ventures, and would literally use legal jargon to explain why I was making poor life choices. Having a lawyer sister means every family argument feels like cross-examination, and trust me, she never lost. The family gatherings were torture sessions disguised as Sunday dinners. Dad would sit at the head of the table, asking Marcus about his latest deals while Jessica updated everyone on her billable hours and case victories. When it came to me, the conversation would either awkwardly skip over my life entirely or turn into an intervention about my phase of trying to build a tech company. I remember one Thanksgiving where Jessica actually brought printed statistics about startup failure rates, like she was presenting evidence in court. The message was always clear. I was the disappointment, the one who refused to color inside the lines. What hurt the most wasn't their criticism. It was their complete inability to see any value in what I was trying to build. They looked at my passion for technology and innovation like it was some kind of hobby, something I'd eventually grow out of when I got serious about life. Every family photo felt like evidence of their success and my failure. Every holiday became a reminder that I didn't fit their definition of achievement. But sometimes, the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who motivate you to prove them spectacularly wrong. The early days of building my company were brutal, and I mean absolutely soul-crushing in ways that would make most people quit before they even started. Picture this. I'm working 3 part-time jobs just to pay rent on a tiny studio apartment, spending every spare dollar on server costs and software licenses, while living off ramen noodles and coffee. My office was a corner of my bedroom with a secondhand desk I bought from Craigslist and a computer I built myself from spare parts. If you've ever felt like you're fighting an uphill battle that nobody else believes in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because this journey gets even crazier, and I want you here for every twist. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, literally. I'd work my day job as a customer service representative, come home, grab a quick dinner, and then code until 4 a.m., only to wake up at 7 a.m. and do it all over again. My eyes were constantly bloodshot, my back ached from hunching over that cheap desk, and I was running on pure determination and way too much caffeine. Friends started avoiding me because I couldn't afford to go out, and dating was completely out of the question. Who has time for romance when you're trying to build something from nothing? Some nights I'd fall asleep at my desk and wake up with keyboard marks on my face. The technical challenges were overwhelming, especially as a woman in tech trying to prove herself without a computer science degree. I taught myself programming languages through YouTube videos and online courses, spending hours debugging code that should have taken minutes if I'd had proper training. Every error message felt like the universe telling me I wasn't smart enough. Every failed test made me question if Marcus and Jessica were right about my unrealistic dreams. I remember one particularly brutal week where I spent 72 hours straight trying to fix a critical bug that was preventing my app from launching, surviving on energy drinks and sheer stubbornness. Money was always the elephant in the room, the constant stress that kept me awake even when exhaustion should have knocked me out cold. My credit cards were maxed out. I was borrowing money from friends who believed in me, and I had to choose between paying for groceries or server hosting fees. Guess which one usually won? I applied for dozens of small business loans and got rejected every single time, with loan officers looking at me like I was asking them to fund a fairy tale. The financial pressure was so intense that I considered giving up and getting a real job at least once a week. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on, and every small victory feels like climbing Mount Everest. My first paying customer was a local bakery that needed a simple inventory system, and they paid me $300 that felt like winning the lottery. I literally cried in my car after that meeting, not from sadness, but from relief that someone finally saw value in what I was creating. That moment taught me that success isn't about giant leaps. It's about countless small steps that eventually add up to something extraordinary. And trust me, those small steps were about to lead to something none of us saw coming. The rejections started piling up like a mountain of crushed dreams, each no feeling more personal than the last. I pitched my software solution to 47 different companies in 6 months, and 46 of them said thanks but no thanks before I even finished my presentation. Investment meetings became exercises in humiliation, where venture capitalists would interrupt me mid-sentence to explain why my idea would never work, usually with condescending smiles that made my skin crawl. The worst part wasn't the rejections themselves. It was how they started to echo the same doubts my family had been planting in my head for years. Every closed door felt like confirmation that maybe Marcus and Jessica were right about my unrealistic expectations. The comments hurt more than I ever admitted to anyone, especially the ones that seemed designed to cut deep. One investor, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, told me I had interesting ideas but lacked the business acumen to execute them properly, basically calling me a dreamer with no real skills. Another said my presentation was cute, but suggested I might be better suited for a supporting role in someone else's company rather than trying to lead my own. A female venture capitalist even told me that tech startups were extremely challenging for women, and maybe I should consider something more traditional. Each rejection letter felt like a small death, slowly killing my confidence word by word. My family's reaction to these failures was somehow worse than the rejections themselves. Every time I came home defeated from another failed pitch, I could see the "I told you so" look in their eyes, even when they were trying to be supportive. Dad would pat my shoulder and suggest I consider other options, while Marcus would offer to help me find a stable position at one of his corporate friends' companies. Jessica was the most direct, telling me that my rejection rate was statistically significant evidence that the market wasn't ready for my solution. Their concern felt more like confirmation of my inadequacy than actual support. The self-doubt became my worst enemy, whispering in my ear every morning when I woke up and every night when I tried to sleep. I started questioning every decision I'd made, wondering if I was just too stubborn to admit I was wrong about everything. There were days I'd sit in my car after particularly brutal meetings and wonder if I was delusional, if everyone else could see something obvious that I was blind to. I began rehearsing resignation speeches in my head, imagining how I'd tell my family they were right, and I was ready to give up on my childish fantasies. The voice in my head sounded exactly like Marcus, calculating and logical, explaining why my dreams were mathematically impossible. But sometimes rock bottom becomes the solid foundation you need to build something incredible, and my lowest moment was about to become the turning point that changed everything. I remember sitting in my apartment after rejection number 46, eating cereal for dinner again because I couldn't afford anything else, when something inside me shifted. Instead of feeling defeated, I started getting angry. Not at the people who rejected me, but at myself for almost letting them define my worth. That anger was about to become the fuel for the most important decision of my life. And trust me, you won't believe what happened when I finally stopped asking for permission to succeed. The moment everything changed happened on a rainy Thursday night in March, and I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was the night I finally stopped being afraid of my own potential. I was sitting on my couch, laptop balanced on my knees, reading through another rejection email when something inside me just snapped. Not in a broken way, but in a liberating way. The email was from a tech company that had shown initial interest, and the CEO had written, "Alexandra, you have passion, but passion doesn't pay bills or guarantee success." As I read those words, instead of feeling crushed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Pure, unfiltered rage at letting other people define what was possible for me. That night, I made a decision that terrified and excited me at the same time. I was going to stop trying to convince other people to believe in my vision and start building it anyway. I grabbed a notebook and wrote down every single doubt, criticism, and rejection I'd received over the past 2 years, and then I started writing responses to each one. Not defensive explanations, but strategic solutions. For every "this won't work," I outlined exactly how it would work. For every "you don't have enough experience," I listed the skills I'd gained and the ones I was willing to learn. By 3 a.m., I had filled 23 pages with what essentially became my new business plan and personal manifesto. The first step was admitting that I'd been approaching everything wrong by seeking validation instead of focusing on results. I realized I'd been spending more energy trying to impress investors than actually improving my product, more time worrying about what my family thought than listening to what potential customers needed. It was like someone had turned on a light in a room I'd been stumbling around in darkness for years. I decided that instead of pitching to investors who didn't understand my vision, I would bootstrap everything and prove them wrong with actual success instead of theoretical presentations. I gave myself a 6-month deadline to either make significant progress or admit defeat, but this time defeat would mean I'd exhausted every possible option, not that I'd given up because other people doubted me. I restructured my entire approach. Instead of trying to build the perfect product for everyone, I focused on solving one specific problem for one specific type of customer really, really well. I stopped networking at fancy startup events where I felt out of place and started spending time in the actual businesses that could benefit from my software, learning their real challenges instead of guessing what they might need. The most important part of this mental shift was realizing that my family's traditional definition of success didn't have to be mine. Dad measured success in steady income and predictable growth, Marcus in status and recognition, Jessica in winning and being right. But none of those metrics reflected what actually mattered to me. I wanted to build something that solved real problems for real people, and I wanted the freedom to innovate without asking anyone's permission. That night, I stopped being Alexandra the family disappointment and started being Alexandra the CEO of my own destiny. And let me tell you, that mindset shift was about to open doors I never knew existed. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it started with small, consistent actions that nobody else could see or appreciate at the time. I began waking up at 5 a.m. every single day. Not because I'm naturally a morning person, but because those quiet hours before the world woke up became my secret weapon for progress. While everyone else was sleeping, I was refining my code, researching my target market, and building the foundation for something that would eventually shock them all. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from scratch while others doubted you, smash that subscribe button and give this video a like, because you're going to want to hear how this incredible journey unfolds. And I promise the payoff is worth every minute of this story. My first real breakthrough came when I stopped trying to impress everyone and started focusing on solving actual problems for real businesses. I reached out to Sarah, the owner of a small accounting firm who was drowning in paperwork and manual processes that were eating up hours of her day. Instead of giving her a fancy presentation, I spent 2 weeks shadowing her team, understanding exactly where their bottlenecks were, and then built a custom solution that cut their processing time in half. When Sarah paid me $1,500 for that first project, it wasn't just money, it was validation that my skills had real value in the real world. Word started spreading through Sarah's network, and suddenly I had 3 more small businesses asking for similar solutions. Each project taught me something new about customer needs, technical challenges, and business operations that no textbook or online course could have provided. I was learning to be scrappy, to find creative solutions with limited resources, and to deliver results under tight deadlines. My tiny apartment became a command center where I juggled multiple client projects while continuously improving my core software platform. The sleep deprivation was real, but so was the momentum. The most important lesson during this phase was learning to celebrate small wins instead of waiting for some massive breakthrough that might never come. Every satisfied customer, every referral, every positive review felt like climbing another rung on a ladder I was building myself. I started keeping a victory journal where I wrote down every accomplishment, no matter how small. Successfully debugging a complex problem, getting a thank you email from a client, or even just having the courage to cold call a potential customer. These small victories were building something bigger than I realized at the time. By month 4 of my 6-month deadline, I had 12 paying clients and a waiting list of 5 more businesses that wanted to work with me. My software platform was evolving rapidly based on real-world feedback, becoming more robust and valuable with each iteration. I was no longer the struggling dreamer working alone in her bedroom. I was becoming a legitimate business owner with actual customers who depended on my services. But the best part wasn't the money or the clients. It was the growing confidence that I was finally on the right path, building towards something that would soon leave my family speechless. The frustrating part about building success quietly is that nobody notices until you're already too big to ignore, and by then it almost feels too late for their recognition to matter. I remember the exact moment when I realized my family still saw me as the same struggling dreamer, even though my business was generating more monthly revenue than Jessica's starting salary at her law firm. It was during a family barbecue where Marcus was bragging about his latest promotion, and when Uncle Tom asked what I was up to, Dad actually said, "Oh, Alexandra is still playing around with her computer projects." I wanted to scream that my computer projects had just paid for the down payment on a new car, but I knew they wouldn't believe me anyway. The dismissive comments continued even as my client base grew and my reputation in the local business community started spreading. I was featured in a small business magazine as one of the rising tech entrepreneurs to watch. But when I showed the article to Jessica, She glanced at it for maybe 10 seconds and said, "That's nice, honey." Local magazines will publish anything these days. When I told Marcus I was considering hiring my first employee, he laughed and asked if I was sure I could afford the overhead costs. Their inability to see my progress was actually becoming fuel for my determination. Every dismissive comment made me work harder to prove them wrong. The loneliness of unrecognized success is something nobody talks about, but it's real, and it cuts deep. Here I was, building something meaningful, solving real problems for real people, and making decent money doing it, but I couldn't share my excitement with the people whose opinions mattered most to me. My clients were thriving, sending me testimonials about how my software had transformed their operations, but my family still treated my work like an expensive hobby. I started keeping my victories to myself, celebrating client wins alone in my apartment, instead of trying to explain why they mattered to people who couldn't see the value. The worst part was starting to doubt myself again, wondering if maybe my success wasn't as real or significant as I thought it was. When the people who know you best can't see your growth, it makes you question whether you're actually growing or just deluding yourself. I found myself downplaying my achievements, making excuses for why my business was just getting lucky with clients, and apologizing for taking up space at family gatherings when I should have been proud of what I was building. Their blindness to my progress was making me blind to it too, which is exactly the opposite of what should happen when you're succeeding. But sometimes the people who can't see your value are the ones who motivate you to build something so undeniable that their recognition becomes irrelevant. I started realizing that I didn't need their validation to know my worth. My clients' success stories, my growing bank account, and my expanding reputation were validation enough. The fact that they couldn't see what I was building just meant they were about to be even more shocked when the truth finally came to light. And trust me, that moment was coming sooner than any of us expected, in a way that would make their years of dismissiveness feel incredibly foolish. Success without recognition creates a unique kind of psychological warfare that happens entirely inside your head, and I wasn't prepared for how brutal that internal battle would become. Even though my business was thriving and my clients were happy, I found myself lying awake at 2 a.m., wondering if I was actually successful or just convincing myself that small wins were bigger than they really were. The voice in my head sounded exactly like Marcus, calculating and logical, asking questions like, "Is this sustainable long-term?" and "What happens when the market changes?" I'd built something real and profitable, but the imposter syndrome was eating me alive, whispering that any day now everyone would realize I had no idea what I was doing. The isolation was probably the hardest part to handle, because entrepreneurship is inherently lonely, and when your family doesn't understand your world, that loneliness becomes suffocating. I was making more money than I ever had in my life, but I couldn't celebrate with anyone who would truly appreciate what that meant. My old friends thought I was too busy for them. My family thought I was wasting my time, and I hadn't had time to build new relationships with people who understood the entrepreneurial journey. Some nights I'd sit in my apartment, looking at my bank statements and client testimonials, feeling successful and completely alone at the same time. Fear became my constant companion, not the fear of failure anymore, but the much more paralyzing fear of success. What if I couldn't handle the growth? What if I made the wrong hiring decisions? What if my competitors figured out what I was doing and did it better? I started having anxiety attacks about things that hadn't even happened yet, creating worst-case scenarios in my mind where everything I'd built crumbled because I made one wrong move. The bigger my business got, the more I had to lose, and that terrified me more than being broke ever did. The pressure to prove myself was becoming overwhelming, especially knowing that one mistake could give my family ammunition to say, "I told you so," for the rest of my life. Every client meeting felt like a performance where I had to be perfect. Every business decision carried the weight of potentially validating or destroying years of work. I was so focused on not failing that I almost forgot to enjoy succeeding, turning every achievement into just another stepping stone toward some impossible standard of enough that would finally make my family proud. The goalpost kept moving in my mind. First, it was making money, then it was making consistent money, then it was making real money, whatever that meant. But here's what I learned about fear during those sleepless nights. It's usually a sign that you're on the verge of something bigger than you ever imagined. The anxiety I was feeling wasn't about my current business failing. It was about my subconscious mind preparing for the next level of success that was coming. Those internal battles were actually building the mental strength I'd need for what happened next. Because sometimes the universe tests your readiness for a breakthrough by throwing every possible doubt at you first. And trust me, I was about to need every ounce of that mental strength for the opportunity that was about to change everything. The phone call that changed my life forever came on a Wednesday morning while I was debugging code and drinking my third cup of coffee. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Michael Chen, the CTO of TechCorp Industries, one of the largest software companies in the Midwest. He said they'd been watching my work, had heard about my custom solutions from several of their partners, and wanted to discuss a potential contract that would dwarf anything I'd worked on before. If you've ever had a moment where everything you've worked for suddenly clicked into place, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because this conversation was about to validate every sleepless night, every rejection, and every doubt I'd ever had about my abilities. Michael explained that TechCorp had been struggling with a massive inefficiency problem across their client management systems, something that was costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost productivity every quarter. They'd tried 3 different consulting firms over the past 2 years, spent over $2 million on solutions that didn't work, and were getting desperate for someone who could actually solve their problem instead of just providing expensive theories. When he described their technical challenges, I realized it was almost identical to the problems I'd been solving for smaller businesses, just scaled up by about 1,000%. My heart was racing, but I tried to sound calm and professional as I told him I was interested in learning more. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at their downtown headquarters, and I spent every waking moment of that week preparing for what I knew was the most important presentation of my life. I created a comprehensive analysis of their current system based on publicly available information, developed a preliminary solution framework, and put together a proposal that demonstrated exactly how my approach could save them time and money. I must have rehearsed that presentation 50 times, anticipating every possible question they might ask, and preparing detailed answers that would prove I understood both the technical and business implications of what they needed. Walking into TechCorp's glass tower office building was surreal. This was the kind of corporate environment my family always said I should aspire to work in, except now I was walking in as a potential vendor, not an employee begging for a job. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and there were 8 executives sitting around a table that probably cost more than my first car. For a split second, I felt like that insecure girl from the family meetings. But then I remembered all the problems I'd already solved and all the clients who were thriving because of my work. I wasn't here to ask for anything. I was here to offer them something they desperately needed. The presentation went better than I could have imagined, with the executives asking detailed technical questions that I answered confidently and thoroughly. By the end of the meeting, Michael was nodding approvingly, and the CFO was asking about implementation timelines and cost structures. When they asked if I could handle a 6-month contract worth $800,000, I somehow managed to say yes without my voice cracking, even though my brain was screaming with excitement. That was more money than I'd made in the previous 3 years combined, and it would establish me as a legitimate player in the enterprise software space. But the real vindication was yet to come, and it would happen in front of the people who had doubted me the most. The invitation to the family meeting came exactly 2 weeks after I signed the TechCorp contract, and the timing felt like the universe had a sense of humor. Dad's assistant called to inform me that there would be a special family discussion about grandmother's estate and legacy planning, scheduled for the same week I was supposed to receive my first milestone payment from the biggest contract of my life. The meeting was set for Friday afternoon in Dad's corner office downtown, the same intimidating space where they'd dismissed my dreams countless times before. If you've ever had to face the people who doubted you right when you're about to prove them wrong, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button, because what happened in that room will give you chills, and the ending will leave you speechless. I spent the entire week before that meeting feeling like I was preparing for the most important performance of my life, except this time I wasn't trying to convince them of anything. The TechCorp project was going perfectly. My team of 3 newly hired contractors was exceeding every milestone, and my bank account was about to reflect the kind of success that spoke louder than any argument I could make. But walking into that building felt like traveling back in time to every moment they'd made me feel small and worthless. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like it took forever, giving me too much time to think about all the times I'd left this same building feeling defeated and questioning my worth. The conference room was exactly as I remembered it. Intimidating mahogany table, leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city like a reminder of how high the stakes were. Marcus was already there in his perfect tailored suit, scrolling through his phone with that arrogant smirk I knew so well. Jessica arrived precisely on time, carrying her leather briefcase and looking like she was ready to cross-examine a hostile witness. Dad walked in last, settling into his chair at the head of the table like a king holding court, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed since I was 12 years old and afraid to speak up at family dinners. The meeting started with the usual pleasantries and small talk about everyone's recent achievements, with Marcus bragging about his latest real estate deal and Jessica updating us on her recent court victory. When Dad finally turned to me with that familiar look of polite disappointment, asking, "And how are your computer projects going, Alexandra?" I felt that old familiar knot in my stomach. But this time was different. Instead of shrinking into my chair and making excuses, I simply smiled and said, "Actually, Dad, they're going better than anyone expected." The tone in my voice must have been different because for the first time in years, they all stopped talking and actually looked at me like they were listening. That's when I realized this wasn't just another family meeting where they would dismiss my dreams and tell me to be more practical. This was my moment to show them who I'd become while they weren't paying attention, to reveal the success I'd built while they were busy underestimating me. The tension in that room was electric. Like everyone could sense that something important was about to happen, but nobody knew exactly what. Little did they know that in about 30 minutes, their entire perception of me was about to be shattered by the sound of jet engines landing on the rooftop helipad just outside those big windows. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life started with the distant hum of jet engines, so faint at first that nobody else in the room even noticed. I was in the middle of explaining my tech corp contract, watching their faces slowly change from polite disinterest to genuine surprise as the numbers got bigger and the scope became clear. Marcus had stopped checking his phone, Jessica was actually taking notes, and Dad was leaning forward in his chair with an expression I'd never seen before, something that looked almost like respect. But then that sound got louder, and I couldn't help but smile because I knew exactly what was about to happen. The sound of the approaching aircraft grew stronger, and Marcus glanced toward the windows with mild curiosity, probably assuming it was just another corporate helicopter doing routine business. Jessica kept her focus on me, asking detailed questions about contract terms and revenue projections with the sharp precision of a lawyer who was finally seeing me as something other than the family failure. Dad was doing mental calculations, and I could see him trying to reconcile this new information with his long-held assumptions about my capabilities. The roar of the engines was getting impossible to ignore, and the whole room was starting to feel the subtle vibration of something large and powerful getting very close. When my sleek black Gulfstream G650 touched down on the rooftop helipad with perfect precision, the entire room fell silent except for the sound of everyone's jaws hitting the floor. The massive jet, with my company logo gleaming on its side, settled onto the landing pad like it owned the building, which in a way it kind of did since I'd just bought a 40% stake in the company that owned this very office tower. Marcus literally dropped his coffee cup. Jessica's pen fell from her hand, and Dad just stared out the window like he was seeing a mirage. The timing was absolutely perfect. My pilot had landed exactly when I'd asked him to, during the most dramatic moment of our conversation. The silence in that room was deafening, broken only by the gradually quieting sound of the jet engines as my pilot shut down the aircraft. I casually glanced at my watch and said, "Oh, that's my ride. I have a meeting in Seattle in 3 hours with another client who wants to discuss a 7-figure contract." The looks on their faces were priceless, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that might have been pride, though it was hard to tell since they'd never looked at me like that before. Marcus was the first to find his voice, stammering something about how he didn't know private jets could land on office buildings, while Jessica was frantically Googling the cost of Gulfstream jets on her phone. Dad stood up slowly and walked to the window, staring at my jet like it was an alien spacecraft that had just landed from another planet. When he finally turned around, his voice was different, quieter, more thoughtful than I'd ever heard it. "Alexandra," he said, "I think I owe you an apology. We all do." That moment, seeing the 3 most successful people I knew struggling to process that I had not only succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but had done it completely on my own terms, was worth every sleepless night, every rejection, and every moment of self-doubt I'd endured. The girl who used to leave this building feeling defeated was about to walk out to her private jet, and the transformation was complete. Standing there in that conference room, watching my family process the reality of my success, I realized that this moment wasn't really about proving them wrong. It was about finally understanding what success actually means to me. For years, I'd been chasing their approval, trying to fit my achievements into their definitions of worth, but now I could see that their opinions had never been the real prize. The private jet wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol of the freedom I'd gained by refusing to limit myself to other people's expectations. If you've ever struggled to define success on your own terms instead of letting others do it for you, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like, because this realization might just change how you see your own journey and what you're actually working toward. The question that kept echoing in my mind wasn't, how did I prove them wrong? But rather, what does success mean when nobody else is watching? True success isn't about the size of your bank account or the luxury of your possessions. It's about the freedom to wake up every morning and choose work that excites you, problems that challenge you, and goals that align with your values rather than someone else's blueprint. My jet represented independence, yes, but more importantly, it represented the ability to help my clients faster, to expand my reach globally, and to build something that could impact thousands of businesses instead of just dozens. Success became less about accumulating wealth and more about maximizing impact while maintaining the autonomy to live life on my own terms. The happiness I felt in that moment wasn't because I'd finally impressed my family. It was because I'd finally stopped needing to impress them. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely authentic, standing in my own power without apologizing for taking up space or downplaying my achievements to make others comfortable. The girl who used to shrink in family meetings had become a woman who owned her success, and that transformation was worth more than any dollar amount or status symbol. Real happiness, I realized, comes from alignment, when your actions match your values and your success reflects who you actually are, rather than who others expect you to be. But here's the deeper truth that took me years to understand. The people who doubt you aren't your enemies. They're your inadvertent coaches. Marcus, Jessica, and Dad didn't believe in my vision because they were limited by their own experiences and fears, not because there was something wrong with my dreams. Their skepticism forced me to build something so solid and undeniable that it couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Without their doubt pushing me to prove myself, I might have settled for smaller goals or given up when the first obstacles appeared. Sometimes the people who challenge you the most are actually preparing you for success you never imagined possible. The most profound realization was that success isn't a destination where you finally arrive and everyone applauds. It's a daily choice to keep growing, keep solving problems, and keep pushing beyond what you thought was possible. Standing in that room with my jet visible through the window, I understood that this wasn't the end of my story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter where I could focus on building something even bigger without needing anyone's permission or approval. The real victory wasn't the money or the jet or the shocked expressions on my family's faces. It was the knowledge that I'd become someone who could create her own opportunities and define success on her own terms. The transformation from family disappointment to successful entrepreneur taught me that the most powerful prison is the one you build in your own mind, using other people's limitations as the building materials. For 29 years, I'd been trying to succeed within the narrow definitions that my family had created, measuring my worth by their standards instead of creating my own metrics for a meaningful life. Breaking free from those mental constraints was more liberating than any financial milestone or business achievement, because it gave me permission to dream bigger than what anyone else thought was possible for me. The girl who used to apologize for her ambitions had become a woman who owned her vision, and that shift in self-perception changed everything about how I approached challenges and opportunities. Walking out of that building toward my private jet, I felt like I was leaving behind more than just a difficult family meeting. I was leaving behind every version of myself that had ever felt small, inadequate, or limited by other people's expectations. The sound of my heels on the marble floor wasn't just footsteps. It was the rhythm of confidence earned through countless nights of hard work, strategic thinking, and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. Every rejection letter, every failed pitch, every moment of self-doubt had been preparing me for this exact moment when I could walk away from judgment and toward my own definition of success. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from their world into mine, where possibilities were limitless and dreams were just plans waiting to be executed. The relationship dynamics with my family shifted permanently after that day, not because they suddenly respected me more, but because I stopped needing their respect to validate my choices. Dad started asking genuine questions about my business instead of making suggestions about what I should be doing with my life. Marcus began referring clients to me when their companies needed custom software solutions. And Jessica actually started bragging about her entrepreneur sister at her law firm's social events. But the most important change was internal. I stopped performing for their approval and started making decisions based on what would serve my clients, my team, and my long-term vision for the company. The success that followed that breakthrough meeting wasn't just financial, though the numbers certainly continued growing at a pace that surprised even me. More importantly, I gained the confidence to hire talented people, take on bigger challenges, and expand my services globally without second-guessing every decision or worrying about what would happen if I failed. My team grew from 3 contractors to 15 full-time employees. My client roster expanded to include Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries, and my reputation in the tech world opened doors I never knew existed. But the real success was measured in the freedom to be completely authentic. No more pretending to be smaller than I was. No more apologizing for my ambitions. And no more seeking permission to pursue my dreams. Today, when I look back on that journey from family disappointment to private jet owner, I realized that every person who doubted me was actually doing me a favor by forcing me to become strong enough to succeed without their support. The challenges, rejections, and criticism didn't break me. They built me into someone capable of creating opportunities instead of waiting for them to appear. Success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right by staying committed to your vision even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something so beautiful and meaningful that the people who once dismissed you can't help but admire what you've created. So here we are at the end of my story, but I hope it's just the beginning of yours. If you've ever felt underestimated, dismissed, or told that your dreams were too big for someone like you, I want you to know that this moment, right now, is when everything can change. You don't need anyone's permission to start building the life you actually want, and you don't need anyone's approval to pursue goals that scare and excite you at the same time. The only person whose belief you truly need is your own. And if my journey from family disappointment to private jet owner has taught you anything, I hope it's that your current circumstances don't define your future possibilities. If this story inspired you to think bigger about your own potential, smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, and ring that notification bell. Because I share stories like this every week to remind people that extraordinary success often comes from ordinary people who refuse to stay ordinary. The question I want to leave you with isn't, what would you have done in my place? But rather, what are you going to do in your place right now? Maybe you're sitting in your own version of that family meeting, surrounded by people who can't see your vision or value your dreams. Maybe you're working a job that pays the bills but kills your soul, wondering if you'll ever have the courage to bet on yourself. Perhaps you're dealing with rejection letters, failed attempts, and that voice in your head that sounds suspiciously like everyone who ever told you to be realistic. Whatever your situation, remember that every successful person started exactly where you are now, uncertain, afraid, but willing to take the next step anyway. Your private jet moment doesn't have to involve an actual private jet, but it should involve the moment when you finally stop apologizing for who you are and start celebrating who you're becoming. Success looks different for everyone. Maybe it's starting that business you've been dreaming about, going back to school for the degree you always wanted, or simply having the courage to set boundaries with people who don't support your growth. The specific goal matters less than your commitment to pursuing it despite what others think, say, or believe about your chances. Your breakthrough might be quiet and personal, or it might be as dramatic as a jet landing during a family meeting. But either way, it starts with deciding that you're worth the risk. I know it's scary to bet on yourself when everyone else is betting against you, but here's what I learned during those lonely nights building my company. The people who doubt you aren't trying to protect you from failure. They're trying to protect themselves from feeling left behind when you succeed. Your growth threatens their comfort zones, your ambition highlights their settling, and your willingness to take risks makes their safe choices feel like compromises. Don't make yourself smaller to make them feel better about their decisions. Instead, use their doubt as fuel to build something so undeniably awesome that they have no choice but to respect what you've created, even if they never understand how you did it. What's your take on proving people wrong versus proving yourself right? Do you believe that the best revenge is massive success? Or do you think there's something even more powerful than revenge? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own story of being underestimated. Tell me about a time when someone's doubt motivated you to work harder, or just let me know what dreams you're building while others aren't watching. Remember, every comment, like, and subscribe helps me reach more people who need to hear that their dreams are valid and their potential is limitless. If you want more stories about turning setbacks into comebacks and doubt into determination, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Because next week, I'm sharing the story of what happened when my biggest competitor tried to steal my clients and ended up accidentally making me even more successful. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one.